problem, low quality standards. The things that we produce are not of international standard, so for export markets, extremely difficult. For manufacture, we don't have natural resources, so we're importing the resources to manufacture, and we then have to re-export it. We cannot get it into the market at prices which are competitive with other places. But the third problem is import duty barriers for getting our products into Australia or New Zealand.
In the PACER Plus negotiations with Australia and New Zealand, the question that you need to ask and negotiate is why? On one hand, we're looking at Australia as our big brother and New Zealand as a big brother. They are helping the Pacific Islands to develop. On the other hand, you're making it difficult for them to develop, and it does not make any sense. The more the Pacific can export to Australia, the more the Pacific Islands buy from Australia, the less money Australia needs to, to assist the Pacific Islands.
The Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations, or PACER Plus, will be a comprehensive trade and development agreement that will offer an opportunity to help Forum Island countries benefit from enhanced regional trade and economic integration.
Well, we know as a fundamental rule of economics that liberalised trade, more free trade helps to promote economic growth, economic diversification, helps to build capacity, helps to drive investment. These are all great outcomes. Of course, we're mindful of the fact that different countries have different levels of economic development. That will be incorporated in terms of the obligations under the PACER Plus discussions that have been taking place. But fundamentally, make no mistake, the ability to reach a trade agreement that covers off on investment, services as well as goods is going to be great for the region. It's going to help to drive economic opportunity and, more importantly, to drive economic growth. And through economic growth, we know that more people will be empowered to realise the potential that flows from a more developed and developing economies.
PACER Plus will provide an opportunity for the Forum Island countries to adopt appropriate policies that will enhance their competitiveness and provide a platform for them to increase and diversify their exports, enhancing their participation in international trade and creating an environment for businesses to thrive. PACER Plus will encourage foreign investors to invest in the Forum Island countries, as transparency will be enhanced and investors assured of the security of their investments. In 2011, Wesley Joseph left Vanuatu to pick apples in New Zealand under the Recognised Seasonal Employer, or RSE, scheme. Since then, Wesley has taken part in the scheme for 3 successive working seasons.
Fatu belum ni kasih lo RSE, we come back. Mana mi build up store belum ya, belum start lo help me from sometimes scheme ye close down. Pemi misabe kat some just small interest lo stop lo mi belum misabe help me one bag na yes more some and now look ni vala house stop ya sama ni go misabe me meno mi pem lo semen after mi pem school fee lo half.
Located in the east of the Coral Sea, 100 kilometres north of Vanuatu's capital, Port Vila, the island of Epi rises from the ocean. It is home to approximately 5,000 Ni Vanuatu. Subsistence agriculture and fishing have traditionally been the economic base of the island. Limited employment opportunities have led the growing population to seek jobs elsewhere in other countries, including Australia and New Zealand.
The time where I scheme gamot, se mi vle sabe ko work lo karam fatu, ikam bak lo Vanuatu lo yusum lo Vanuatu.
Mimi ko mi vla lo place kat kan custom. We suppose one boy blow you, and me take one woman, you must pay make him custom. Color funded la. So me got 5 boy. So me ko mi him lo ko lo come back. Lo pay mo woman. All beginning employee, then we make them only married or just Now, Miko, the Mikamba, me pinchim, me make him go to look at everyone. Masin, finish now. Got the independent number. Got to look at them all beginning of look at. All benefit will be in Kasem Law RC scheme. Emi been helping me vela plante plot lo school fee. Mo plopem school fee plot beginning. Mo lo side lo living blo mi vela mi change him living blo mi vela lo island blo mi vela. Yes.
Seasonal labour programmes are widely adopted around the world. In the last decade, both New Zealand and Australia have implemented labour mobility schemes for Pacific Islanders to address seasonal labour shortages in their horticulture and viticulture industries. These labour mobility schemes are increasingly seen as offering a potential triple win, as the schemes benefit the seasonal workers, the sending country and the receiving country.
At the peak of our Hayward Orchards harvest operation, there's 100 workers on site. 60 of those are picking apples, and about 40 of those are in the pack house. Out of the 60, 34 of those are RSE workers, and the rest are made up of Kiwis or working holiday permit people. The reason we got involved was have consistent labour force that was trained, seasonal workers just as capable, but every year we have to retrain. Their tendency to be here for shorter periods of time was a problem. So having the consistent labour force that was available for us for 7 months was a real win for us. That's the prime reason to go into it. Ownership of the job is a lot easier to get the RSE workers to take ownership of the job because they're returning every year. They get to see the full cycle. They prune the trees, they thin them, they manage them, and then they pick them, and then they come back the next year. So the ownership of that job creates a better work ethic. With the working holiday people, they're in, they're out. It's very hard to get any sort of ownership of the job. So the quality of work I can get out of an RSE worker with that sort of ownership on the job is just you just can't put dollar value on it. Yeah.
What RSE has done for the people here, I would say, is much more valuable to individuals here than what we would see as the aid that comes in goes to different organizations, and this is like touching the people at the grassroots level. And especially I see this impact especially with those people living in rural areas and who go out to New Zealand, come back to their rural areas and help to develop their own homes. So I'm really proud of that. I really appreciate what the scheme has done for these people, and I would really like to see it continue, and I believe it still has a lot, because our education system here hasn't changed. We get students up to year 6, they drop off, and then they remain here, and I think we have the workforce for the market out there, but when this happens, people sort of tend to learn from each other, because we also have our rules here that if you want to be with the group, our chief has to, give the okay for you to go, because they think you're somebody who can behave, and so that has really helped in sort of molding people out here too, in rural areas.
The Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations, or PACER Plus, is creating a robust platform for dialogue on labour mobility that will encourage greater access to the Australian and New Zealand labour markets by seasonal workers from Forum Island countries. The PACER Plus negotiations have already resulted in the lifting of the cap under Australia's Seasonal Workers Programme and an increase in the cap under New Zealand's RSE scheme from 8,000 to 9,000, and the extension of the schemes to new occupational areas of interest to the Forum Island countries.
The PACER Plus comes to galvanize Pacific Island countries' efforts to be able to reach some sense of predictability. I think one of the missing elements under present circumstances is the guarantee that we could be able to have our people, particularly the lower skilled people who would be able to take up employment in Australia and New Zealand, and that is why in the negotiations we have always insisted on having a legally binding agreement through which we could be able to have predictable conditions against which we send our people to work in Australia and New Zealand, and at the same time also I believe Australia and New Zealand could do more by way of increasing the cups of available opportunities that are offered to our people to work in Australia and New Zealand.
There's been some very good discussions around labour mobility in PACER Plus, but it's important to recognise that it's just not about this PACER Plus negotiation or agreement. Certainly when it comes to labour mobility, there's a number of schemes that have been put in place and have been working for quite some time. One of the ones that I'm very excited about, and I think will offer us direction as to where we might go in the future, is around particularly semi-skilled people and how we can best offer them opportunities to increase their skill levels. We have two pilots underway in New Zealand at the moment. The first is around fisheries, where fishermen from Kiribati come to New Zealand and receive training. The second will start in 2006 around construction in Christchurch. And this will be an opportunity, I think, through these trials to look at how best to offer greater education and greater training, to offer qualification that can then be used well in the economies of the Pacific Island countries. After all, through adding skills to your economy, people get to do much more within that economy. It raises the education levels, and it means that services can be provided more easily. It'll also mean that the many benefits of PACER Plus to Pacific Islands will be able to be delivered on more quickly.
We have export potential in taro, coconut, beer and beverage, food and beverage, handicrafts, garments and all that. There is potential there. But private sector are saying, forget it. The restrictions and the red tape is too much. Why should I bother? I'd rather just sell locally and export to New Zealand and make my money and live happily ever after, you know?
The tremendous growth in food and agricultural trade carries tremendous benefits, but may also pose serious threats to human, animal and plant life and health. Countries balance the benefits from trade and potential health risks through the establishment of sanitary and phytosanitary laws. Furthermore, the growth in global trade is usually accompanied by a proliferation of technical regulations and standards to address a range of concerns, including product safety and the protection of the environment. Although almost all products produced in the Forum Island countries enter into Australia and New Zealand duty and quota-free, sanitary and phytosanitary laws and technical regulations impose extraordinarily high costs on Pacific producers and exporters that, in turn, limit their access to the Australian and New Zealand market.
The farmer is okay now. We have plenty of taro. But the thing is that we need to improve the facilities first. We have the laborers, we have the workers, we have the expertise, and we need to improve the facilities to pack taro.
We have a lot of people that are interested in exporting, say taro, like as I mentioned, but we have to tell them, I'm sorry, we can't export it because it's prohibited into Australia, or it needs to undergo some kind of irradiation treatment. We don't have those facilities.
We spent about 15 years to work on the HDFA. The HDFA is the treatment that we can now use for those foods, those 3 foods to be accessed to be exported to New Zealand. I guess the issue is we have so many other fruits. I mean, as a technical person, I would like to see that there is a generic system to try and speed up the process.
Acknowledging the challenge of meeting sanitary and phytosanitary requirements, technical regulations and standards, Australia and New Zealand have committed to assisting Pacific producers and exporters to meet their quarantine and related product requirements through programs such as the Pacific Horticultural and Agricultural Markets Access Program, or PHARMA.
Before we entered the Australian market for our copra meal, we were mainly exported to New Zealand and Japan, and we were trying hard to enter the Australian market, and we are lucky that with the help from the farmer, we were able to enter the market. Farmer helped us a lot in trying to negotiate with the Australian quarantine department. And luckily 2 years ago there was an audit came here from the Australian quarantine, and we were certified, and now there's an open door for us to for our copra meal to the Australian market.
In 1993, a fungal plant disease known as the taro leaf blight, or TLB, attacked Samoa's taro industry, completely wiping out its exports of taro for a number of years. Following an extensive period of research and development, Samoa managed to create a range of TLB-resistant taro varieties. The PHARMA program devoted substantial resources to facilitate market access for Samoan taro. Samoa's exports to New Zealand have now been re-established, and it is also engaged in a series of initiatives to gain market access to Australia, including through the development of a frozen taro pathway and the upscaling of marketing and labelling efforts.
PHARMA definitely has been of tremendous help. In the sense that it's facilitating some of these biosecurity issues, addressing technical interventions to assist industries to meet market requirements. So PHARMA has been very helpful in identifying and actually helping private sector to develop protocols and develop products that will, into the stage where it meets the Australian market requirement. So in that respect, it's a very useful program. But then once you've satisfied those requirements and meet the packaging requirement, you still have to export the product to Australia, and you still go through all this red tape. So what do? On one hand, you're trying to help, and on the other hand, you're making it difficult. So I really hope that the PACER Plus negotiations will help in removing and reducing the documentary and both tariff and non-tariff barriers, and focus on the proper and a short form of documentation that will not only protect Australian, we understand Australia needs to be protected because of biosecurity risk, but that doesn't mean you need 8 set of documents on top of, when everybody else is only imposing 2 to 3 documents.
Through the Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations, or PACER+, parties are determined to strike a careful balance between the right of countries to adopt sanitary and phytosanitary measures to promote and protect human, animal and plant health, and the need to ensure that the same measures do not unreasonably restrict trade between all parties. Australia and New Zealand are committed to providing the necessary assistance to the Forum Island countries to implement their treaty obligations in these areas and to meet their relevant SPS measures so as to enhance market access opportunities for them.
Facilitate trade. Flexible rules of origin is very important. At the same time, the rules of origin has the purpose of determining the origin of the product in order to confer preferences. So there needs to be a balance with the rules of origin. However, the product-specific rules of origin that is being discussed under PACER Plus negotiations has the potential of facilitating greater trade amongst the Pacific Island countries and between Pacific Island countries and Australia and New Zealand, including Fiji.
The Ranger Garments is a garment manufacturing company in Fiji, and it was established in 1984 by my father, and it was initially set up to cater for the domestic market, but within the first 12 months to 24 months, he had opportunities to export, and that's when Spartica had started to become more prevalent, and he found a couple of customers in Australia and he started exporting, and since then we've become more or less 100% export oriented. Well, most of the raw materials that we use come from Asia, in particular China, predominantly China, but also other countries like Taiwan, India, and Hong Kong as well. The main reason is because of those factories, the suppliers, they have economies of scale, and they're able to offer a fairly competitive price as opposed to other developed countries who may be offering similar raw materials. We employ almost 500 people. At our peak in around 99 to 2000, we had over 1,000 workers. But at that time, when we had the 2000 coup, as most of the industry was affected quite badly, we had to reduce our staffing. But for the past 3 or 4 years, we have been quite steady. In fact, the last 12 months we've increased our staff levels a little bit, and most of the workers that we employ, close to 80%, are women, and they come from various backgrounds, but most of them are from the lower socioeconomic category of the economy, and quite a number of them are younger ladies, as well as single mothers, predominantly those who don't have opportunities in other industries to get a job. Our industry, particularly in our company as well, we take on new staff and we train them, and most of these women are first-time entrants to the workforce. They have not had a job before. So that way we are able to contribute to the economy as well as the community. Well, under PACER Plus, we would want that the rules of origin are very simple, and that would be some substantial transformation instead of value-added formula, which is what's used in the Spartica rules of origin. Change of tariff classification would be preferable, which is more or less a substantial transformation. It makes things simpler, and it opens up, allows us to have a wider range of raw materials that we can use and convert and export into finished goods into Australia and New Zealand. The other thing is it's also less bureaucratic. There's less red tape, less paperwork. It's simpler, more transparent, and I think it allows us to focus on marketing as opposed to doing gathering all these papers and documents, which is not really what we are. We are manufacturers and exporters.
The Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations, or PACER Plus, parties have identified rules of origin as one of the priority issues in the negotiations. The parties have agreed to use product-specific rules to determine the origin of non-wholly produced or obtained goods. The flexibility should create enough value addition by the Forum Island countries and promote their exports.
I agree that the flexible rule in PACER Plus agreement would encourage greater export from Pacific Island countries to Australia and New Zealand. As you are aware that most of the Pacific Island countries, they currently only exporting produce. We are expecting that having a flexible rule in PACER Plus will encourage manufacturing to focus on goods that can enter Australia and New Zealand, and also can attract foreign investment to set up a new factories that can manufacture goods and be able to enter Australia and New Zealand markets. We foresee these as Pacific Island countries can have some extra plus in our export.
The major challenge for the exporters or the people from PICs to export to ANZ market is really the supply side, and also the SPS issues that we have to deal with before we go into the market. An example is if I want to export something like noni to New Zealand or Australian market, they will demand that I will do it to a certain standard, certain packaging, labeling, and these things need money, cash. So I think that in the development assistance in the PACER Plus agreement should address these little issues for little farmers, little people, because in the PICs we don't have big companies where they can afford to buy to bring their products up to be able to enter the market in Australia and New Zealand. We're talking about small farmers that they cannot afford to do that.
The group in the PACER Plus negotiation, all chapters are important in the Pacific, in the PACER Plus negotiation, but this particular chapter on development assistance and economic cooperation is primarily important because of the avenue for further funding. And that funding, the crux of the matter is to be able to address, to be able to help the Pacific Island countries to be able to meet their obligations under PACER Plus when it is agreed upon. And the other dimension is to be able for the Pacific Island and island countries to address the supply side constraints, which is key in terms of the ability to trade under PACER Plus.
Australia and New Zealand have committed to provide the Forum Island countries with assistance, not only to implement their obligations under the PACER Plus agreement, but also to help them address the many supply-side constraints that have undermined their efforts to increase and diversify their exports and enhance their participation in international trade.
Well, in Port Moresby this year, our leaders spoke of greater regional integration and cooperation. And so PACER Plus and the trade ministers have been tasked to help deliver on this for our leaders. So PACER Plus is an opportunity for greater economic cooperation. It's also about bringing down barriers so that there are more opportunities to trade. So we know that for Pacific Islands goods and services, in many cases the access to New Zealand is easier than some other parts of the world. But through a high quality trade agreement, it will open up opportunities for more trade, more goods from Pacific Island countries to be sent out, but for more inward investment as well. And very much in the experience of New Zealand, the way that we grow our economy and offering more opportunity to New Zealanders is through investment and attracting foreign direct investment. So I think that's going to be one of the very important parts of this. New Zealand has no closer relationship with any group of countries in the world than the countries of the Pacific Islands. So the development part of this free trade agreement is extremely important. Our government is committed to spending $1 billion in development assistance and aid in the Pacific over the next 3 years, and it'll be a very important part of the things we need to consider and talk about as we come towards the conclusion of the PACER Plus negotiation. But trade is one aspect of it. We're also committed and know that funding will need to be provided to help with the implementation of PACER Plus. We'll need to look at ways that we can best reduce some of the supply side constraints, and a study is to be done that will look individually at each country and see what challenges they have and what assistance can best be provided to help with that implementation, but also to maximise the opportunity for all of these countries to benefit from the advantages of PACER Plus as quickly as is possible.